yet. You have no clue. You don't know literature? You don't know fine Italian?
You just wear it.
What are we going to do with you?
That's your name tag. You just duct tape it on your shirt. Yeah.
Brutus,
Just text him that.
beware of the Ides of March.
Welcome to the special Middletown City Council meeting for Friday, March 15th, 2024. Please join me by standing for a moment of meditation first, followed by the Pledge of Allegiance to the American flag. You will hear 3 taps of the gavel when it's time to stand. Please join me for a moment of meditation now. I pledge allegiance
To the flag of the United States of America,
and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you. Ms. Genk, would you call the roll, please?
Here.
Mrs. Carter. Here. Mr. West.
Here.
Mr. Horn. Mayor Slamka.
Here. May I have a motion to excuse Councilmember Horn from today's meeting?
Motion?
May I have a second?
Second.
Thank you. It has been properly moved and seconded. Ms. Genk, would you please call the roll?
Mrs. Carter.
Yes.
Mr. West.
Yes.
Mayor Slamka.
Yes.
Mr. Farrell.
Yes.
The yeses have it, and Councilmember Horn is excused from today's meeting. We need a motion to receive and file the special meeting documents.
Motion?
Thank you. Is there a second?
Second.
Thank you. Ms. Genk, please call the roll.
Mr. West.
Yes.
Mayor Slamka.
Yes.
Mrs. Carter.
Yes.
Mr. Farrell.
Yes.
Thank you. Okay, so we are here to discuss options and recommendations for the 2024-2025 Community Development Block Grant, or otherwise known as CDBG, action plan for this coming year. Mr. Lally?
I'm going to defer it to Mindy. I guess we were just going to review what our recommendations from staff and CDP are, and then if you guys want to alter those, change, or redirect some of the funds, then we will be ready to prepare that for Tuesday night public hearing and then vote afterwards in the legislative part of the agenda.
Okay, sounds good.
Mindy, if you want to review our recommendations.
Good morning.
Good morning.
Good morning.
Good morning.
So just to kind of review what we talked about in our previous meeting, the recommendations that have been put before you are from subrecipients and city projects that were put forward to best fulfill the 9 priorities that are outlined in the consolidated plan. So the recommendations are under the area of housing revitalization, the CDBG activity of housing, to give $60,000 to people working cooperatively for emergency home repair, and $20,000 to self for emergency home repair, totaling $80,000 in that category. The second category of public service, which I'll remind you has a 15% cap of whatever is allocated to the city, is to give $10,000 to Housing Opportunities Made Equal Home for fair housing training and education, as well as testing in the community at the rate of $10,000, and legal aid of Greater Cincinnati for $15,000. And then 2 programs that CBI operates, one for workforce development and their Cradle to Career program, which is youth activities, for $86,424. And then the last recommendation for a project is for Oakland Park renovations and improvements, $402,839. And then the last item in the budget is the 20% administrative costs that pay ARFI to administer the program for the city.
Thank you. Councilmember Horn did have one question that he relayed to us, so I can read it, and then we have some explanation as well if you need further explanation. So his question is, when we're talking about PWC, the people working cooperatively, and the emergency home repair specifically, he says, how do you define an emergency, and what is your reaction time to said emergency? And examples he cites are water heater, furnace, AC unit, electrical, water itself, and so forth.
So those would all constitute emergencies. Emergency is really, does this keep this homeowner from being able to live safely in their home? And what is the level of urgency to get that repaired? So that is something that PWC, we don't get in the weeds on defining that, but PWC defines that. They have their own policy for how they do that. And the question did come up earlier about what is the response time, and it's usually within a week. It can be quicker if it's super urgent and the homeowner doesn't have any place else to go. I mean, they look at it on a case-by-case basis to make sure that person can remain safe. So it's within a week is the average response time. And emergency is anything that keeps that from being a safe environment for them to live in. So their electric is out, they have no hot water, their heat is out, those kinds of things would constitute an emergency.
He further goes on to say, because he had heard that there's a 40-day waiting list. And so he says, for example, and again, you said that PWC is the one who has this protocol, so maybe it's a conversation with them. Sure. But for example, maybe he was thinking there could be an emergency list and a non-emergency list. For example, if a door doesn't shut true, is that given the same priority as water being out, air conditioning in the summer?
That's a great question. I think that's a question we would need to ask specifically to them, because I think safety is one of the things that they look at as an emergency. So if they have no way to lock their door or to close themselves and be safe, that would constitute an emergency. Mm-hmm. But I would have to ask them specifically how they navigate prioritizing those individual projects.
I think Councilmember Horn would like that, to see like how that is prioritized, what the protocol is.
Yep.
And then also he was basically going on to say, for example, you might want to say this to BWC as well. He says if Mr. or Mrs. Citizen calls and the water heater is out on Friday, are they there by Tuesday? That kind of thing. He's just very concerned about the health and safety of residents when he heard that long waiting list.
Yes.
Specifically for example, air conditioning, elders, 40 days could be 2 months of the summer. It could take longer, as we were talking about, with parts and things like that. So it could be like the whole season. So that was his main concern, and that was his question.
Yes, it's a great question, and I'll clarify what that 40-day, I'm not sure where that comes from. So I'll ask those questions to PwC and get your response.
Okay.
Question on that. I'm actually kind of surprised. Well, I guess, so I sell real estate, and if you do an FHA loan, you have to have heat, you have to have hot water and all that, but you don't have to have AC. So more or less, just my comments, like I'm surprised that AC is at the top of the list with the rest of those things, because that's not necessarily a requirement for safety for an FHA loan, so,
I don't think it always is, but there are a lot of people who struggle with breathing, for example.
makes sense.
Or they have reasons, physical reasons, health reasons why they would need to be
Yeah,
in AC. So I think that's where it's not as black and white sometimes. It is more subjective.
Yeah.
And depends on the person. But I'll get some clarification about even that example.
yeah, I was just
of
curious.
Where
I
that's
mean,
an emergency and where
I
it's
mean, AC is definitely an emergency for a lot of people, and I'm not saying that. I more or less just, I'm surprised that that is at the top of the list with the rest of the things, because it's not a.
It wouldn't be for
necessity
everyone.
requirement. Yeah.
No, I hear you. I hear you.
My question is the Cradle to Career and Workforce Development, $86,000. What does that involve?
So CBI has a lot of programming they do with youth. And so one of the priorities that's outlined in the consolidated plan is to make sure there's a safe place for youth. And so Cradle to Career is what they call kind of their programs. They serve everyone from cradle all the way up to seniors. But the program that the CDBG funds go for is specifically for the youth component of that. So youth activities, things that kids can come to and participate at CBI. That's what CDBG specifically pays for with the youth component. They also do some workforce development. And so there is one of the priorities that's in the consolidated plan is readying residents of Middletown to be able to fulfill the jobs that are in the community. So one of the big concerns that was raised 5 years ago was we don't have a readied workforce for jobs that are currently available. A lot shifted since then because of COVID. We have probably different priorities now, but when this plan was put in place, that was the priority. And workforce development is something that CBI offers and brings people in, does some soft skill coaching, helps them ready with resumes, things that help people be ready to fill the jobs that are available in the community.
And those programs are the programs that CBI does down at the community center.
Yes.
Okay, and I was wondering, because of that, 70% of spending must benefit low to moderate income persons.
Everyone that they serve at CBI fits that. They get demographic information and income information on everyone that's served. So they have that on the families and of the children that come, the youth that come, and they also get that for all of their workforce, people that they're helping through their workforce development. So they income qualify. So people that are served are people that would fit that LMI category.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Looking at what people have, we have fair housing, home, fair housing, legal aid, and last year it looks like 2023 home received $12,500. Is that correct? And this year they'll be receiving 10. It looks like, as far as recommendations. And just curious, how many people has home helped in the past 4 years? What is the oversight? How do we track this?
So they submit, all the subrecipients, that's the people that receive the funds, the organizations, we call them subrecipients in CDBG land, all of them are required to submit performance reports. So just to clarify kind of how the funding works, is they are reimbursed for expenses. So the city doesn't give them a check and then they spend. They have to submit a draw reimbursement request with the proper backup documentation. And with that draw request, they also submit a performance report. So it says, what are they doing? How are they progressing with what they said they would do? And then at the end of the year, they do an annual report so that we can report back to HUD, here are the things that were accomplished with CDBG funds. So everyone submits those things. I would have to go back and look over the last 4 years and see how many people home actually served, but it's somewhere in the neighborhood of 40 to 50 a year. But that varies because sometimes they'll do a training for realtors, and so they'll have different number of people that they've trained. They send flyers out or send information out or attend a fair. So some of that, how much did they distribute, gets into those numbers as well. They also do testing. And so if they've had a discrimination complaint, they'll go out and test to see if there indeed is something that needs to be pursued in terms of discrimination. So I can get you a hard number over the last 4 years of how many people they've served. But I know in general, they serve more in Middletown than what CDBG pays for, because this is part of their service area. So not everything that they do in Middletown is represented by CDBG. CDBG just pays a portion of what they're able to do. This is part of their service area, and they would serve it whether or not CDBG was allocated or not. But this is a priority of HUD, fair housing is. And so we need to allocate some dollars and make sure that CDBG is supporting fair housing.
Is there a minimum payment that must be given for home on CDBG?
No,
Okay. And did they state why they asked for less money this year?
they didn't ask for less. The recommendation was less than what they requested, and it was simply because of that public service cap. So there couldn't, everyone that applied couldn't get the full amount that they requested.
That's right, 15,000 what they requested. Looks
And it
like.
was not reflective of anything to do with them, just
Okay.
the numbers game.
Right, just to be clear, the 15% cap equals of the total that we have of $742,828 for CDBG, that equals the $111,424 that we see on the screen. So we had to work within that framework.
That's right.
That makes sense. Okay. And again, speaking for the 2024 annual action plan, if we are going to be moving any money, we would have to work within this framework as well. Specifically that 15%, the 20% for administration, but then the others could shift.
That's correct.
And I had some questions also. This is really nice to be able to go over this now because it does sound like we are going to be starting the plan for the city is going to be starting the plan for the consolidated plan, the 5-year plan. When will that start?
So that starts as soon as this one is in. That's a pretty long process. So it is a lot, that's where we do a lot of the conversations. A lot of things you see referenced in the annual action plan occur during the consolidated planning process. So that's where the community conversations happen. That's where we're looking at the data that's available. Other studies that have been done, assessments that have been done in the community are all pulled in to try and maximize the amount of information that we have to speak to the 5 years that we want to do. So as soon as this one is into HUD, we will start that next process, that next 5-year consolidated plan.
So that would be end of March or beginning of April?
It'll probably be May.
May.
Before we would actually move forward with that.
Okay. And could you speak a little bit how the community is involved? How do you have like a broad cross-section of people? Just speak to that process a little bit.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yes, as broad as we can get, the better. We want to hear from individuals that represent lots of different industry, lots of different stakeholders in the community. We tap into coalitions and groups that are already meeting, not trying to reinvent the wheel, but tap into people that are already meeting and get their input. We do surveys. Those had mixed response last time. I think that we could do that. I hope that we get a little bit better response this time, but try to get as many avenues for people to speak into the process as we can. So some of it's in person, some of it is online, doing some things through social media, doing a QR code that leads to a survey, anything that we can do to get as many people inputting into the process as possible we want to do. We have done the necessary pieces that HUD requires in terms of the public hearings and public meetings and those kinds of things. Those have not historically gotten as much response as meeting with people individually or going to those different focus groups and having conversation with people who are already being convened. So that's, the broader we can get, the better. We want the community at large to speak into this process because as you are seeing, that consolidated plan really drives the annual action plans. That's when the priorities are set. So we want to get that right. And so much has shifted since COVID. And it's just a different day than it was 5-6 years ago when that process started. So we want to have as many speaking into that as we can, and any suggestions that you have or that city staff have as to how to do that to the best we can, we want to do that.
Sure. I'm already thinking, like, one of the first things that came to my mind was our new communication manager and posting it on our website, doing the things we can. making it fun and exciting, like you were talking about the QR code. Also, Mr. Lally, I know there had been some discussion of a possibility of a newsletter going into the water bill. Is that still in conversation? Because that could be something that gets in
Yes,
the...
it is still in conversation, and absolutely, we would include something like this for the consolidated plan in any newsletter and publications we put out.
That could be like where a survey goes. You mentioned mixed responses. What do you mean by that? Was it just like all kinds of things being said, or do you mean like very low response? Okay.
Low response to this survey specifically. Great response in people. People are interested and they'll do this. They'll talk pretty candidly when you're in front of them. But I think that we could get more of the broader community in through surveys, people who aren't involved in community groups, as many people as we can get to from Joe Public to respond and speak into. I think surveys are a good tool to do that, but we didn't have great response in the last time.
How long is this period usually when you start in May? So say you start May 1. How long does this community involvement last?
Last time it was like 90, 120 days, but that's flexible. I think it needs to be done correctly. And so if we can do ahead of even going after, looking at the RFPs for the new year that will start, which comes in the fall, I think the bulk of the work needs to be done prior to that. One of the thoughts I had, I was sharing with Deborah, one of the thoughts that I had was we have the option to do more specific requests for proposal. So if we want to replace lots of roofs in Oakland, we could put an RFP out to do that. Or if there's another community need, rather than the process has been, here are the priorities, and give the opportunity to the nonprofits in the community to speak into, here's how we could help the city achieve these priorities. We could be more specific than that, and that may be something we want to consider as we look at the next consolidated plan and the first annual action plan that will come this time next year.
Wonderful. And yeah, I'm just having ideas. And again, I don't know what you've already done, but even like having a town hall for organizations or something and say, come here if you're interested. And I don't, have you done things like that? Or how does that work with the organizations?
We have had community meetings. We didn't call them town hall, but obviously there was a lot of success with people coming out for the town hall meetings.
Okay.
And so I think that that's a great idea to try and get more people engaged and hear from them.
That's exciting. Look forward to seeing how that works.
Yeah.
Okay, so looking here. Now, with the last time we spoke here in chambers, a question was, if possible, if you can find out from SELF how much in funds that they could actually support this year or coming up. Does somebody might be able to speak with that?
There was a meeting she was just in, so.
Deborah Wells from Development Services, thank you so much.
You're welcome. Good morning. We did meet with PwC and SELF this week to have this very conversation. I have been emailing back and forth with them for a couple of days since. They were both of those organizations are dedicated to work here in Middletown, and they are very excited about the idea of having a little bit more additional funding. We did talk about some program years in the past before this department was formed. The city did allocate, they believed it was about $200,000 in total for those two programs, not specific to each organization. And PwC at least felt that, in their opinion, that's the appropriate funding amount for those programs in town. However, with it being almost April at this point, they're not prepared capacity-wise for that sort of a funding increase for this year. PwC, unfortunately, I'm still waiting on a number from them on what they think they can handle. There were some questions with SELF. Mindy and I and Ashley are going to set a meeting with them to kind of explain exactly what additional funding could be used for as a part of their budget and the program, what will qualify as eligible expenses. But both of those organizations were interested in a smaller increase this year to gear up potentially for a larger increase for the 2025 year.
Okay, so looking at what they applied for, was the discussion basically what they applied for, what they could handle this year?
Yeah, They all believe that they have the capacity to handle more funding than they asked for
For this year as well?
for this year as well.
Okay.
Just not as large of an increase, up to $100,000 per entity.
Right.
And I will have finalized numbers before Tuesday's city council meeting from both those organizations. But Self had a question about what they would be able to spend it, what eligible expenses would be covered under an increase. They wanted to make sure they were going to be able to spend the funding for what they would plan before they agreed to accept it.
Okay, well, that's exciting, because I was thinking, perhaps, for example, we could go ahead and raise this to the give them the extra 10 that they had asked for, at least, but if they can't, if you'll know Tuesday a better number, then that could be a possibility to kind of shift some funds.
Yeah, and they absolutely had no issue with the 30,000 that they applied for. When we recommended their funding at 20, apparently there was a miscommunication because their board approval was for 20, even though they asked for 30. And when we talked about that, they thought that might have been a discrepancy in the application. They said they absolutely it should have been 30.
Okay.
But they thought it might have been an error. So,
Okay,
yeah.
so that'll be exciting to see what is actually on the sheet. Does that sound like something that you guys want to consider?
My question would be, where would we shift 10K, for example?
Well, yeah. So I was thinking, well, the further question would be, okay, looking at Oakland Park, right?
Yeah.
So we have the $402,839 there. And that's kind of where I would see that we would take that money from, based upon just some things, like we had asked last time, what was that money for specifically? Do we have an action plan for that money? Last year, I believe it was for the 2023-2024 action plan, Oakland Park received $422, roughly, $1,000. That the money wasn't spent. Why was that? That kind of thing. So wondering maybe if we had a smaller amount, a smaller plan for Oakland Park, or a very specific plan for Oakland Park, maybe some of the funds could be shifted from there. That was my thought. Any comments?
Maybe this is a question for either Ashley or Paul, but that 402,839 number, how, is that flexible, or is that?
Yeah, I mean, it's flexible. But once again, it just depends on what kind of RFPs we get back if we put the Oakland Park thing out to RFP.
Yeah.
I'd say if you're going to take it from anywhere, that's about the only place we
Right.
can make adjustments.
That's what I was thinking.
I mean, to be honest, I don't think we'd have a major problem with that at all.
It's kind of what I was thinking, is like 10K from 400 probably wouldn't make or break,
Absolutely not.
you know?
Kind
So,
of
I mean,
I wanted to speak up. You're on Park Board. It's kind of like Goldman and Sherman. We're trying to do kind of a refresh. That's probably what we'd be doing in Oakland. It wouldn't be anything major, but I know that, like, the basketball court is pretty costly, the numbers we're getting back, but I would look at a refresh. Maybe we wouldn't have to put it out to RFP necessarily if we're doing similar to Goldman and
right,
Sherman.
yeah. But yeah, so far, I mean, with Sherman, it's been a little bit surprising that some of the costs, and I hesitate to say this, but some of the costs have been a bit lower than what I had projected, looking at, because even though it is a refresh, when you start bringing in new equipment and things like that, even, the paving and things like that. So, I would be amenable if, for example, if Self was increased to 30, me personally, I'd be okay with that.
And also, because CDBG funds are, am I correct in saying they're pretty much guaranteed every year? Like, we will be getting these funds every single year. The amount might shift, but the funds will be coming in, because then that could be part of the 5-year consolidated plan too. It's like, okay, Oakland Park, so perhaps maybe a little bit less is done this year, but it gets done.
Right.
And then we make sure things get done next year as well. So that might be a possibility. And it is very exciting to think about what we can be doing in our parks. I'm very excited to see what's happening with the parks, the Sherman and Goldman as well. Also, Abilities First did apply for $120,000. I believe you said, was that for ADA accessible playground equipment? Or what was that for?
It was for playground equipment, yes.
Yeah. Did they say where it would be going?
It would be on their property.
Okay. And was that for ADA accessible?
It is, because that's the population that they're serving, it definitely would be.
Why didn't they receive their funds?
So there were a couple of things that were concerning. One was the project cost. There wasn't anything specific. It was just numbers. There wasn't a bid. There wasn't anything concrete that was submitted. And the balance of the project was roughly $160,000. Let me see. I don't have that number right here, but the amount that they were having to put in themselves was significant, even more than the 120 to be able to do the project. And the minutes that they submitted that showed that the board approved them to put the application in show that they're in fairly hard financial times. So it did not seem to lend itself to them being able to have that cash to do the balance of the project. And that there wasn't any other concrete plan for how they were going to be able to do it. So it was a question of concern. That was one of the concerns. The second concern was it really didn't fit a priority. So it wasn't open to the public. It wasn't in a public park. It wasn't beautification of any kind of public space. It was specific to the clients that they serve. One of the suggestions that I had for several of these projects, actually, that weren't recommended is for us, CDP, to consider looking for some other additional dollars for them or helping them figure out, here's where this fell short a little bit. Let's talk about how you can fix some things in the organizational, the way this is presented, so that you can be more attractive to funders, and here are some other potential funding sources. Warbirds was one that wasn't recommended because it wasn't eligible, but it's not very much money, and there are groups that help with historic. So that was one of my suggestions, was that maybe we could do some technical assistance with each of the applicants that weren't recommended to see how we could help them build capacity. That's part of what we do at CDP, and so we could bring that piece to this. It doesn't cost anybody anything extra, just I feel like it's something we can do some added value for these applicants that weren't recommended.
Yeah, that's wonderful, actually, to help them understand where the money could come from. And with the Safety Council, that was for neighborhood revitalization, correct? And the talk was we're already having some money go towards that. So was that the reason why that was not accepted as well?
It wasn't, I'm not,
Yeah.
yes?
That's my understanding of what that money was directed towards, and we were concerned about the amount of that money going to mostly administrative cost.
Gotcha. Okay. See what else I have here.
DMI,
Ms. Carter, can you say that again?
DMI, asked for 23,000.
DMI gets a line item out of general fund already, right? What
Yeah.
was the,
Yeah, we assist DMI with $25,000 annually,
Okay,
yeah,
okay.
and then we also assist with advertising for various events they do.
And what was the application for this then? What were they going to be doing with that? For low income, moderate?
This was for loans, so they wanted to do loans for small businesses. There were a couple of concerns. One was it doesn't meet the priority for workforce development, because workforce development in this consolidated plan was to ready the current workforce for current jobs. And this was creating new businesses and supporting entrepreneurs. A great project, just didn't fit in the priority. The other thing to consider with loans is that program income becomes a problem with CDBG. So if you loan, if the city gives a subrecipient a grant and they loan those dollars, the repayment of those loans belong to the program. So they're program income. They don't come back into the nonprofit. They remain with CDBG. And so it becomes more challenging to try and make sure that we account for those well when those dollars are being managed by a subrecipient. So it doesn't mean it can't be done, but it's more complex. But the real concern was that it just didn't fit the priority.
because they're not truly expending them They're loaning them,
Correct.
yeah.
That makes sense.
But I would love an opportunity to talk to Jeff further about, here are some other options and some other opportunities, because I do think, I'm a small business, and I understand, that it takes some capital to get those things started. I would appreciate a conversation with him to see if there are other options outside of these funds.
I would like to have a map of the Oakland Park District. I want to know where in Oakland Park starts, where it ends.
Sure, we can get you that.
Okay,
We'll get that for all of council.
okay.
And are you speaking, because there is Oakland Park, and then there's Oakland. So you would like to see Oakland, the area, and then you'd also like to see where Oakland Park is?
I didn't know that area is called Oakland. That's what I want, Oakland.
And so this, for public infrastructure, parks improvements, Oakland Park, that would be specifically for the park, just like we were talking about the Parks Board. So it wouldn't be for Oakland in general, but the,
Community, yeah.
right, correct, the park itself. And as far as, will there be a breakdown as far as what will be going on in Oakland Park? As far as how the money will be spent? And exactly, like if we're taking more funds from here, just saying, what are we going to be doing this year with these funds that we have? And I think there's something called a CAPER, which kind of gives us the evaluation of how, am I correct in saying that's an evaluation of how, what's it stand for? It's
Consolidated Annual Performance Evaluation Report.
right, so it comes once a year and we get to see, could there be progress reports as far as how the park is going, maybe through the Parks Board, or how would that work to get updates on how Oakland Park is being accomplished?
Absolutely, and we'll do that exactly how we're going to do the update with council on all the parks with the capital improvement money and what we will do with the neighborhood revitalization money that comes to be appropriated Tuesday night. We'll keep council informed frequently on what projects will be coming up and how we're progressing through all the parks and Oakland Park.
Wonderful. Would that be like on a quarterly basis, or how often would that be?
Quarterly, if not
More?
more frequently.
That sounds
I would venture to say more frequently.
Okay, great.
Great.
That sounds wonderful. And so we will, I'm sorry, we will be able to see a breakdown of where that's going to, the improvements are going? Okay.
Yes, there will be a full project budget that would be available.
Okay, wonderful. All right. Well, I think those are mostly, well, I guess that's mostly the questions I have as far as the budget this year. And then I guess I just have more questions, and this could be discussed at another time as well, just how we'll be reaching out, what do you call it, the Citizens Advisory Group, or is there a name for how you reach out about the consolidated plan? I'd love to hear more about that at some point as well, how that's going to work and what it's going to look like, and maybe how we're going to do it differently this year to improve on response.
Yeah, we can definitely prepare kind of that plan of action and a timeline.
That'd be great.
And yeah,
What we could do too is, like at one of the future council meetings, first the mayor and city managers report, have Mindy come back and give a full report on exactly the plan to do the consolidated progress.
That would be really wonderful. CDBG funds are so important to the city, and they make such a difference. I do appreciate the care with which this is approached and handled and researched very much. That's all I have for today. I think it sounds like we're looking at the possibility of increasing self monies at this point, not necessarily PWC, but we will hear more about where PWC is what they're able to do and what self is able to do this year by Tuesday, and that will be reflected in the plan. This sounds like? Okay?
Yes.
All right. Is there any more discussion, input, questions?
I don't.
All right. Well, thank you so much. Really appreciate that. And Mr. Lawley, anything else from your end?
That's all we have.
All right. Thank you so much, Ms. Mueller. And with that, at 10:09, this meeting is adjourned, 10:09 a.m. This meeting is adjourned until March 19th, 2024 at 5:30 p.m. in these chambers. Thank you.